Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, my comic book friends, and welcome to Bizarre Brain Comics. I am Gary, your host. And this is where I like to take a look at some older comics, talk a little bit about the characters and creators, and examine the stories and the art. Okay. I decided this time I would get a big handful of comic books out of my collection, just more or less at random, featuring Uncle Scrooge. Yes, Walt Disney's Uncle Scrooge McDuck. And of course, Uncle Scrooge, as we know him, was created by cartoonist Carl Barks, but he actually made his first appearance in A Mickey Christmas Carol as Uncle Scrooge's, and of course, it was the place of Ebenezer Scrooge, and then that was successful enough that they decided to bring him into the fold, because he was a character created specifically for that. And Carl Barks did that, gave him his character and his background, and created the money bin and and all the swimming and diving in all the money and coins in the money bin. And it was back in the 50s, and he, of course, Carl Barks is the best known and a favorite of Disney fans, as they, especially in older times when they didn't give creator credits, he was known as the good duck artist. And he did the comics, and I think he did comic strips too. I'm not positive on that. I can't remember, because I did some background on him one other time, because I've covered Uncle Scrooge before in more detail, and of course the comic books were published by Dell, and then later Gold Key after Dell and Western split. And for the comics, Uncle Scrooge is probably my favorite, because he's usually has more adventurous type stories. Of course, Mickey does too, and Donald does as well. But overall, I think Uncle Scrooge's are the best. And of course, they always had a lot of shorter, silly stories, but they had some stories that were longer and more adventurous, but still with the humor and some great artwork. So we'll look through some of these. And these two here I've actually covered in depth before. This is Uncle Scrooge 261 and 262. Well, and this is when I guess Walt Disney was publishing the comics themselves in the late 80s and early 90s, because these are from 1992. And this is Return to Xanadu, a two-part story that was, and this was written, and it is a sequel to a Carl Barks story. This was done by, written and drawn by Don Rosa, and I talked about before, and he is my favorite Scrooge artist in any. And he's a big fan favorite too. Now, I remember after the demise of Gold Key, and in the actually early 80s, and I think it was real early 80s, and possibly even as far back as the late 70s, when they stopped publishing the Disney comics, which were still fun, but not as good as they had been before, and were later, and they're almost exclusively by then reprints. Because they just had really lost popularity in the U.S. and lesser degree in Canada, and they weren't being published here for several years. But the Disney properties, and especially Uncle Scrooge, and Donald Duck were extremely popular in Europe and South America. And there was I think it's Egmont was the primary publisher in Europe for these for the Disney properties. So they had they got a lot of creators, writers, and artists, European, some American, some South American, I think, who produced the stuff. Remember, this is decades before they took over Marvel, before they acquired Marvel. So, they were produced over there. Then they, late 80s, early 90s, they came back. And they followed on with, like in this case with Uncle Scrooge, with the ones that they had the same titles for. They carried on the numbering of the earlier incarnation with Gold Key and Dell. So this is, as I said, this is a sequel to a Carl Barks story, and Don Rosa did several of those. Some of them were, many of his stories were completely original. Others were sequels to other stories, to the Carl Barks stories, and some of them were based on something mentioned in an Uncle Scrooge story, and we'll get to, especially his background. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. That's Return to Xanadu. That's from 92. They don't go to 94. And here, this is where this Uncle Scrooge Adventures, number 27, was, and this is from Marvel. It was, from what I understand, Disney was still producing the product, and Marvel was publishing it for them. That's the way I understand it. If I'm wrong, please correct me. That's the way I understand it. So here's Uncle Scrooge Adventures, and this is looks like a real fun adventure. And again, this is Don Rosa doing the cover, and he did the wrote and drew the interior story as well. And I think Uncle Scrooge under Don Rosa had the best adventures. And I think a lot of the better Donald Duck stories that I've come across in more recent years have been by him too, but not exclusively so. And so they had this, but this is Uncle Scrooge Adventures, not Uncle Scrooge. That's why it's only number 27. And here, this was a fairly long story, that and so that there was no short backup. Then we're back to Uncle Scrooge, and still by distributed by Marvel. This is Uncle Scrooge 286, and this is part of the life and times of Scrooge McDuck. And I want to point out this, and of course the whole thing is written and drawn by Don Rosa, and he did a lot of research into the Carl Barks stuff, taking references that Barks mentioned throughout the years, and then compiled a bit of his biography that way, and then did historical research to put into those locations, and then developed adventure stories around them. And here he is in 1880. This is actually part 2. I don't know if I've got an issue with part 1, but I do have the whole thing in trade paperback. And unfortunately, it's a worn copy. And the spine is broken, and some of the pages are coming out. But it's still a great book, great read. And I love this because of all the history. It still has the humor, but it has the nice adventure. And this is when it started. This is when Scrooge was a young boy, the Master of the Mississippi. And the first one was him in Scotland, still in Scotland. And when he ended up when he left Scotland, and here he is in Mississippi in 1880. As still just a young boy, and working on a riverboat in the Mississippi. He's out to find his fortune. Then I think this had this one didn't have a backup. And it's an early encounter with the Beagle Boys. And he basically grew up on the river. And on the river boats. And he was, here goes when he's to his onto his early adulthood, I think. No, this is when he's still just a nipper. Yeah, it goes on to his early adulthood. And I think that was his first encounter with the Beagle Boys. Then we'll go to Uncle Scrooge number 286, still Don Rosa. This is 1882, and he's left the river. And now he's a cowboy. And he's having cowboy, and he's going to protect them stairs from that there big bar. And look at the great detail in the artwork. And I think I did an in-depth on this one. I'm not sure if it was this one. I think so. And this is when he first met Teddy Roosevelt. Oh, here, yeah, this is the one. Is in the Badlands, and thereafter, and we got the nickname Buck McDuck. And I go up against that bar, foiling wrestlers, foiling a bar, and finding dinosaur fossils in the Badlands of the Dakotas. And then we go to 288. This is 1884, and it looks like he's changing from a cowboy to a miner. Still Don Rosa, raider of the Copper Hill. Yeah, he's a miner. Again, big adventures. Also good fun. And this one, 289. This is 1885, and he had to make a trip back to Scotland because to become the laird of the manor. And of course, he became laird, but the only property they had was a broken down castle. But and this is part 5 of the life and times of Scrooge. But I had little things like this. This is Tony Strobel, and this is reprints from like the 40s and 50s, stuff like that. But this was original, and this was when he went back to become laird of the manor, and it involves a ghost story in there, and it's yeah. And they're all a lot of fun. This one's actually got a backup story. And I owe you, but who? I'm not sure if this was Carl Barks or not. I'm just not familiar enough with Carl Barks's work to just identify him specifically. But I think it is. Because they have Barks did a lot of stuff and doing a lot of reprint. Here we go to 290. This is 1887. And this is when he's in South Africa, at the Transvaal in South Africa, searching for diamonds and gold. The terror of the Transvaal. And another wild, woolly adventure, because he was quite adventuresome. And one thing with Carl Barks, and look at those, the great interpretation of those elephants. It looks like that was taken right out of, what's his name? Bern Hogarth. He's got one, looks almost exactly like that. And Jungle Tales of Tarzan by Bern Hogarth. And but this is neat, because they often had little text pages with articles and stuff, and this is stuff Don Rosa. And this actually shows copies of some of his original layouts. as he's working up the story. Sometimes they have interviews and other stuff. This has a backup story as well. Bye Bye Money Bin. Then go to 291. And he's in Australia here in 1896. 1896. Dreamtime Duck of the Never Never, Part 7. Another little fun thing there. So he's having an adventure in the outback. Don't know what all he's doing. And then a backup story by some of the other creators, either contemporary or reprint from the classic stuff. And the making of the life and times of Scrooge McDuck. Some cool stuff, all cool stuff, fun reading. But this is when, that was the last one I've got from Marvel. Then Gladstone. Gladstone. Is that right? Anyway, yeah. Took over publishing the books, and this is 294. So we skipped a few, but this takes place in 1902. It's still the life and times of Scrooge McDuck, but here one noticeable difference is they used newsprint, same as the interior paper, for the covers for a while. Kept probably able to keep the price down just a little bit, and yeah, and he's got some of his family that have come over, which eventually gave rise to Donald and the boys decades later. And with Carl Barks doing the stories, and then Uncle Scrooge stories were always set in the 1950s in Duckburg, primarily Duckburg. And of course, that's where he's at. He's the richest duck in the world. He's got his money bin. He's a bigwig in Duckburg in the whole world, and which is set in the fictitious state of Calisota. And another Gladstone, still with the paper cover. Now, this is a different cover. This is still Don Rosa. This is Ducks, Dimes, and Destinies. But this one is not part of the life and times of Scrooge McDuck. But this is a story. Well, it is, because it's the life and times chapter 0, because it's a Don Rosa story, and it's Uncle Scrooge in as the old codger that we know and love. But this is a story about Magica Dispel, one of his many great enemies. And she went back in time to try to get his number 1 dime before he got it, or about the time he got it, because it's magical. But it's because it's his number 1 dime is the reason it's magical. She tries to get it, and so that's why it fits in. What fits in when he was young, and that takes care of that, because she is foiled. And then it has a backup story. Edmont, yeah. David Gernstein writing, Daniel Branca is the artist. And Don Rosa, Carl Barks, Tony Strobel, Daniel Branco. There are a lot of them. Here's still Gladstone, and this is different because this is number 1, right? But this is Scrooge McDuck. These were Walt Disney Giants, and it started a new numbering system. It was a bigger book, probably 35 to 40, 36 to 40 pages or so. I didn't count them. And this is Scrooge McDuck in Hearts of the Yukon. And this is a real good one. It takes place in 1898, but it's not. It fits in, but it's not part of the life and times. And then and Don Rosa followed on with, like Carl Barks, keeping Uncle Scrooge in the 1950s. But some of the other creators, they always kept him contemporaneous. because he couldn't have Uncle Scrooge as he is now, as he was then, around now, and still having got all his loot in all those adventures in the 1800s. And then here's issue 2, and this is Uncle Scrooge in Arabia. And this is number 2 in that, and the Mines of King Solomon. But this story is a reprint of a Karl Barks story from the 50s, and the backup is as a backup story by, if I can get to it, from the 40s. Here we go. This is another good one. Still Gladstone, but it's Uncle Scrooge Adventures again. That title again. Number 51. This is from what, 97, I think? And yeah, 1997. Don Rosa. This is treasure. I think this is in India, as an adventure in India with Uncle Scrooge and Donald. Look at the tiger. Oh, that's so cool. That's just some really great stuff. And but it's got the heavier glossy paper for the cover now. And still Gladstone. Still Gladstone. Here's Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. Completely different title. Number 1. And these are completely different creators. And I think this was Daniel Branco. I'm not sure. Branca. I'm not positive on that. But has a follow-up story. A secondary story. Where is it? Yeah, there it is. A secondary story. Which is a Donald Duck story. Donald Duck solo story with the boys and stuff. It's called The Crocodile Collector. And this is a really nice Duck adventure story. And then we're going to finish this up with a jump to 2007 to Gemstone. Gemstone Publishing. I have just a few of these. And they started doing this much thicker volumes. Basically a graphic novel or a graphic album. This was celebrating 60 years, so this would be like 80 now, almost 80. 60 years of Uncle Scrooge from 2007, March 2007. And it's numbered 375. And this is a Karl Barks story, but it's not all Karl Barks. But it does have a Don Rosa poster going along with that story on the inside, and that's really nice. And then it has another story by other creators, Uncle Scrooge in Curses, and really nice stuff. And then a Don Rosa thing of young Scrooge in commemorating his at that time 60th anniversary. So that's Duck Heaven. That's all I've got for you this time, with a bunch of Uncle Scrooge McDuck. Scrooge McDuck. Lots of good, fun adventures by various creators, but mostly Don Rosa. I just love Don Rosa. And he is a big fan favorite, and I have gone way too long. But so I hope you enjoyed this. Please you have Disney friends who are Disney fans. Share this with them. Like, share, and subscribe. And do leave a comment. What do you think of Uncle Scrooge? I'm planning on doing Donald Duck in a few weeks. So, what do you think of Uncle Scrooge, or Don Rosa, or Karl Barks, or any of the other creators? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, comics are art. Ooh, get Scrooge in there.